I've seen projects that, kind of are twisting sideways and stuff. Like the lessons that I see the students draw are like, they don't feel like the right lessons. I'm like, that's not the right lesson here. 3 years ago, I would have thought like, oh yeah, you learn as much from a failure as a success. And it's like, I'm not convinced of that anymore. I'm like, I want to try to do everything I can to make the project successful so they can learn at least those and build on those. I have plenty of times to pick up the failures, but I think realize it might be hard to learn from failures. Like you and I, if we fail in a project, we could probably self-diagnose pretty well, like what went wrong. But if you don't have like 50 successes under your belt, like I don't know how you properly diagnose like what went wrong, and draw the right lessons for that.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Decision Intelligence Lab podcast. I'm your co-host, Vijay Mehrotra, and today's guest is my co-host, Michael Watson. Mike and I have both been teaching project-based classes for several years, and I was very interested in learning more about the mechanics and the insights that Mike was taking away from his classes at Northwestern. Personal note, I believe strongly that as knowledge and information becomes easier and easier to transmit, the value that we create as educators is around transforming people and supporting them through experiences that they couldn't potentially have handled prior to their education, scaffolding that and helping launch them into careers. So experiential learning is really important from my point of view for higher education professionals in technical fields in the 21st century. Mike, I'd love to have you tell me about your class at Northwestern, starting with who the population is that's in the class.
All right, yeah. So I teach it's industrial engineering, and it's an undergrad class, and we call it Client Project Challenge, and we run it junior year. So we made a conscious decision with some advice from our advisory board several years ago to run it junior year, so the students could have this experience, before their junior year internship, and second, before they start looking for jobs in the fall. And so it's a little bit different that, you don't do it at the end of your senior year. So, there's a trade-off that they don't have, necessarily all the classes. But then on the other hand, it does help them in their job search. And then it helps them, I don't know, it just helps them in their senior year to get more, have a different view of the classes they take senior year. So we run it spring of junior year. We're in the quarter system at Northwestern, which means this starts approximately April 1st and runs through early June is sort of the time horizon of the class. And this year it sort of, goes in waves. And this year I have 18 projects, and I have teams of 4 or 3. So I had to make a decision. I think I like teams of 3 better than teams of 5, and so we went with that. And the idea is to get industrial engineering kind of focused projects. But you said in the intro, perfect, VJ, and it's like one of the fun things about teaching the class, both fun and challenging, is like I don't know what to expect. Like it's when I do a case study in a normal class, I know exactly what to expect. I know what the answer is. I know how to get to that answer. And here, when we get the clients, as much as we talk about and I try to scope them out, the projects out, like, the projects are going to twist and turn. And I think this is part of the educational experience is the students have some educational scaffolding behind the scenes to sort of help them think through a problem that doesn't have an answer going into it.
Yeah, Mike, let's talk a little bit about how you source projects. Do you have a kind of a mailing list? Do you kind of use your personal network, all of the above? What's your approach, and how do you qualify whether it's a good fit or not?
So it's definitely a question I get to from my days at OpEx Analytics. Like, what do I do? And it's like I do everything I can do. So I do blog posts. I'll reach out to Northwestern alum. I reach out to my personal network. We actually do have a company that we work with that helps us get these projects. So there's that avenue too. So it's all the above in terms of reaching out. And what I'm looking for is, or whatever, anyone who does these projects is looking for is like, is there A, enough meat, and B, is there not too much meat in the projects? We had, there's a professor here, Barry Nelson, who did this for a while before I came on board. And he had a great way to say it. And I totally stole this from him. He's like, when we talk to clients, what we say is, I would like your 4th most important project, knowing you're only going to get to your top 3. And so that's the one I want. It's important, but if it doesn't go well or we don't get as much done as you think, it's not going to derail your plans for the year. It's sort of, something on the top of your list that you're just not going to be able to get to without doing something like this. And so that's
Yeah,
kind
it's
of what
interesting.
I'm looking
I love that line from Barry. It's similar. What I talk about with potential project partners is give me something that's important but not urgent,
for. Right.
and something that has been on your to-do list every quarter for the last few quarters that you never quite get to, but you don't take it off. You're still interested.
Right. Yeah, because
So,
what you want is you want on their side, you want it to be that important that they'll be at a weekly meeting with the students. Right? There has to be that
yes.
give and take, and they need to meet with those students on a weekly basis to keep it on track, both from their point of view and the student's point of view. And it's if it's that important, if it's too unimportant, it's too easy to skip that meeting.
Oh, so, Mike, how do you kind of make sure that the client is technically ready in terms of having the data and the problem statement, things like that?
So I talked about it. We're in the quarter system. So basically, I spend the end of the fall quarter, which is Thanksgiving through the holiday, and then January, February, March, just talking to clients. And what I tend to do is like help the clients come up with a scope document. Like, all right, here's exactly the project we're going to tackle, and also help the clients envision kind of what the data might look like. And then I do spend a lot of time just trying to remind the clients, like, please get the data, please have the data ready. That's because the other thing about these projects, and you know it too, VJ, is that when you work with a school, it's different than when working with like a consulting company,
Oh,
which people are
yes.
used to, right? Consulting company, if things go run long, it's like, they run long. It's like, someone pays for it and it just goes longer. Here, it doesn't work that way. Like the summer hits and internships start and grades are due and the project is over. And so you really have to sort of focus on like, all right, do we have the data? Can you meet once a week? Is it an important enough project? And let's, the 10 weeks, or in our case, 10 weeks is what we have is like 10 weeks goes really fast. You have to remind the students of the same thing. The 10 weeks goes fast. Like keep trucking and keep making mini deliverables along the way.
So, Mike, let's talk about those weekly meetings. So, who participates from your side? Do you participate in the meetings or just the students? And who participates from the other side? And who kind of drives the process?
Yeah. So the way we've chosen to do it here, and there's pros and cons of different approaches, is that we've decided that we're going to have a fully student-led project. And so our students lead the meetings. They're on the meetings with the client. We have so there's me in the background, and then we also have a faculty advisor who meets with the students once a week. But that person does not meet with the client. So we really don't interact with the faculty does not
Mhm.
interact with the clients, which is it's the pro is that the students get this real world experience. And I've talked to students who've gone through the class, and their feeling is like, yeah, I'm on the phone. On the other end is like I'm just treated as like a peer adult, and so it's a great experience because if I'm on the call, then it
Yes.
changes the whole balance of things,
Changes
right?
everything for
Yeah, and
sure.
and other programs can do that because if there's different objectives, it makes sense to can do that in certain situations. But we're like, nope, we're gonna have the students lead. Of course, it makes me nervous. It's like I'm nervous the whole 10 weeks. I'm like, oh, I hope things are going well. And every time I see the students, like, how's it going? So trying to give that back end encouragement. But I think we've chosen that, and I think it's a valuable learning experience. And the client side, we like to get the client to have at least one or two people who's committed to being on every meeting. It might not be the executive sponsor, but it's like someone who really wants to see this done. We've had some clients who you've probably seen the same thing is that they use this as a teaching experience for their team. Some of their younger, less
Yeah.
experienced people can now lead a project that is of somewhat importance to the client, and that can be a valuable experience for them too.
Mike, I want to ask you. So, what I tell my clients when they ask how I assign students to teams is we have the clients pitch the students about their project, and then I have the students give me their first, second, and third choices, and then I lock up in a room with nothing but potato chips and Diet Coke and try to match the wants of the students with what I think the needs are of the projects and the personalities and the vertical industries. Clearly not an efficient process, but my scale is small.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
interested in how you approach this question of assigning students to projects and to
Well, let me ask you a
teams.
question. Do you override some of the student preferences at times, like to get matches you think might be better?
So I can say this, having done this now for 15 years, I've never once not assigned a student to one of their top 3
Okay,
choices.
perfect.
But I've definitely have put students on a second choice project for them because the project needed that skill set or that temperament.
Mm, okay,
And that's a little bit tricky for sure.
that's tricky. Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's why I asked for 3 that's why I asked for 3 preferences, and I sort of no, I don't guarantee. I would say one of these days, the time will come where someone will get assigned to a project they didn't ask for, but so far, with 3 choices, I've managed.
Okay, that's impressive. So my process is probably less scalable than yours, VJ, and maybe I'm less organized too. Like I've got this timing problem. Like I don't tend to line up the projects that far in advance because I always worry if I line them up too far in advance that they'll go stale by the time the class kicks off. maybe that's just me justified in my head. And so
I
and then the other,
you're not wrong, Mike.
okay.
This year, I had a client literally from the time that I committed to them to the 2 months later when the project started, completely pivot their business model,
Okay, right.
rebrand the company. So you're not wrong
No,
to
I
be
worry about
concerned
that. I
about
worry about
that.
reorgs and people leaving their job, and like, I'm like, all right, let's just keep it fresh. But then, so then what I do is, and this is different in other schools have different approaches. So my background in OpEx analytics when we were doing projects is that I found that our junior consultants and even me, like, it was almost impossible to tell which projects were actually going to be good and which ones weren't. And so I kind of got worried with the ranking and the pitching that it would be like people would go with brand names and things like that. And so what I do instead is that I send out a big survey, a comprehensive survey, like, what do you want to do? And there's a lot of free form answers in there. And then basically I kind of rank those and then look at the projects, what each of the projects need. And I spend a lot of time like getting to know the students and what their skills are and sort of how they would work in different teams. And then I actually have a big optimization program. I feed it all in there and end up running a bunch of scenarios and sort of matching up all these teams and then go from that. So it's it's sort of a half optimization, half me making some judgment calls about sort of what might make a good team and what kind of skills are needed on which project. Um, and so like I think it works okay. It's like I can see the pros and cons of all kinds of ways. Like you let the students rank and they feel more ownership. They got to pick the project. Your downside is probably letting someone down if they don't get their top choice. And then mine is like, well, students didn't get pick it, so maybe they don't have as much buy-in. But then also, I think in the end, they sort of trust the process. Like, all right, we did consider sort of what you wanted and what your skills were as we match
Right.
you up with this client.
Well, Mike, it's something you mentioned earlier, and then as you were talking about team assignments, I kind of remembered my own nervousness. But you've got this full career that you've had in industry. You've started companies, you've sold companies, you've led teams, but you still get nervous about the projects.
Oh, totally still get nervous. I'm so
Yeah.
nervous the whole time, VJ. Like we have final presentations coming up next Monday and Wednesday. So as we're recording this, when we release it, they'll probably be done. But I'm nervous. I'm just
Wow.
hoping like, oh, hope they deliver. Hope they deliver for their clients. I've seen some peaks of some of the final presentations of clients. They look good, but I never know. Like it's hard to keep my
Yes.
finger on all 18 projects. But for sure, I still get nervous. I have a feeling like I feel like once I don't get nervous, it's like that might be a sign that it's time to move on. Like I think I want that feeling.
Is that something the students talk to you about? Their own anxiety and their nervousness in the process?
They do. It's like that we have peer feedback. So we use a tool from Purdue called Cat Me, like the animal cat me,
Yes.
and it's actually a very good feedback tool. And for sure they express that. And it's like, I definitely see some students who I think they learn something about themselves because it's like, I had a team this year that was just struggling with like, I think we're making too many assumptions. I don't really know. And I had to tell them at some point, I'm like, well, this is the point of the class is to put you in these situations where no one knows. Like, I don't know the answer. And I told him, I suspect you know it better than the client does at this point. You've spent more time in this particular problem with this data set than the client has, and your assumptions might be better than you think. But it still makes them think in different ways, right? If it was a normal class,
Yes.
like I would know the answers to all their questions. But this one, I'm like,
Right.
I don't know either. Like, this is something you'll have
Yeah.
to develop as you go through your career.
Well, what's interesting about that is that it, it it's a moment for the students when they realize that there's nobody that can come and save them. That
Right.
this is the moment that they're in. They've got to carry this forward.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I like it.
I'm and building on that. What do the students tell you after the class that they feel like is most valuable in terms of where they feel like they learn and grow the most?
I think they feel like the post class surveys or they feel like they grow the most leading the projects themselves. This is why, despite my
Yes.
nervousness, I'm kind of trying to lay low this week and I could be bugging a lot more people and a lot more teams, but I'm like, I should just lay low and let the process unfold a little bit. And it's like, that gives them a lot of confidence that they can tackle these problems, that it wasn't me giving them the answer. It was them coming up with the answer, them coming up with
Right.
the solution. And that for sure helps them grow. One thing I did find, and this came up in a Doug Gray interview at some point. I think Doug Gray, when we interviewed him, I think he said
Yeah.
something that,
Very early. Yes.
yeah, very early. He said, and it stuck with me. He said, people learn from other people's failures and their own successes. And I think I've seen that. Like when I've seen projects that, kind of are twisting sideways and stuff, like the lessons that I see the students draw are like, that don't feel like the right lessons. I'm like, that's not the right lesson here, and so I try to like, I've kind of like 3 years ago, I would have thought like, "Oh, yeah, you learn as much from a failure as a success." And it's like, I'm not convinced of that anymore. I'm like, I wanna try to do everything I can to make the project successful so they can learn at least those and build on those. I have plenty of times to pick up the failures, but I think it's hard to learn from a failure. What I've realized, it might be hard to learn from failures. Like you and I, if we fail in a project, we could probably self-diagnose pretty well, like what went wrong. But if you don't have like
Yes.
50 successes under your belt, like I don't know how you properly diagnose like what went wrong, and draw the right lessons for that. And so that's the a thing I kind of watch out for. That's like, my
So
my job is to worry. That's the goal of this, as an instructor of this course.
yeah, I actually sometimes transfer some of the worry onto them to tell them that I don't want them screwing up my brand and reputation.
Well, I mean, there's a
As
there's a little
the
bit of that too, right? So
um, so I'm interested in, uh, kind of you mentioned that the class is taught in junior year. Do the students come in with largely the same coursework and background, or are they kind of at different points in their major even though they're at the same point in the
yeah, so
academic
so it's,
calendar?
yeah, so that it's something the department's worked really hard. So before I got here, they laid the groundwork for junior year, and so the groundwork that we laid is there's like 6 fundamental IE, OR classes you have to take before you can do this, and we have this whole sequence mapped out. They either start into freshman year or sophomore year, and stats, probability, but then they get the optimization, they get the simulation, so they get this core foundation, and then just by chance, some students will have taken some advanced classes or some leadership classes or project management classes or more or less computer science. And the survey sort of teases that out. And so when I see a project that needs like, it's a manufacturing project, I look for put 1 or 2 students who've taken the operations class and put them on that project or think about putting them on that project. But
And, and
because this is like the trade off of doing it early is that they haven't gone through the curriculum yet. They haven't, finished all the core courses,
but
or
but
every course, right?
so this is when you mentioned at the outset that it was junior year, the first thing that popped into my mind is they must have this must for a lot of them be their first experience in truly having to self-teach, where they've gotta go learn things because the project needs them to learn them. It hasn't showed up
Right.
in a course. Is that a common occurrence, and how do they do with that?
Oh, it's a common occurrence, and so this is where, like, LLMs have made life a lot better. So, 3 years ago when I did it, for sure, we'd have students on a project. Maybe it was an inventory project, and the students like, "Well, I haven't had the inventory class yet." Or the students would go bug the inventory. If the professor who most teaches inventory, like, "Teach me this." And now I kinda say, like, you don't have the same excuse. Like, you have to now, if you're on an inventory project, you've got this tool that can teach you everything about inventory in the context of your particular problem, not some generic inventory model. So you have this capability, and I think that's been pretty helpful. The same thing with development too. Like this year, I changed the curriculum a little bit to try to push much harder to get working prototypes built. Like 3 years ago, I couldn't do that. Like you just couldn't, if students didn't have any kind of computer science background, they weren't going to be able to build a prototype. But now it's like I think I have at least 2 projects that are vibe coding, basically what could be the start of a software startup company. Long way from that, but it's like on that path. And then I have a bunch of
Yes,
other
yes.
projects who are building very nice prototypes, which just wouldn't have been possible. Even last year probably wouldn't have been possible with all the latest advancements. So that's been kind of interesting. But you're right; it sort of forces you to learn things you know that you didn't know you needed to know, and you got to learn it on your own here for this project to succeed.
And that is incredibly valuable to students, no matter what stage they're at, to sort of
Right.
know that in it's a really big insight that LLMs are potentially your best just-in-time tutors
Yeah, right, and
out there.
I think the best thing too is like, if you just have to learn something generically, it's a little harder, but now you have the context. You have a client who has a real problem, and you can now start to frame your questions to say like, "All right, here's the parameters of this particular inventory problem or this particular manufacturing problem. Like, how should I think about this? How should I think about this business?"
So, uh, you had a blog post recently that was entitled "Something Big is Happening."
Yeah.
Something new is happening. You talked about building prototypes. Are there other things you're seeing in terms of how the student projects and the student delivery is evolving as a result of AI?
Um So yeah, the prototypes are the big one, and I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I know the students are using LLMs quite a bit, and it's like I'm not. Are they pushing themselves as much as they could on the prototypes? I'm not 100% sure. I'll have to see. I'll have to wait till the end to see how that works. So that's one. The other thing that hasn't happened this year, which happened a lot in the past, which is also like just generically across the university, I'm sure, is the TAs have been used a lot less. um, like now I suspect
Interesting.
those two
Yeah.
things are related. So now I've got to think like in the past, like I would have student teams that would sit down with our TAs for like hours and hours and hours a week just to figure out, hard technical things about their particular project. And this year, the TAs have, they're not getting much attention. And so it's almost like I got to figure out next year, going into next year, like how do I redesign what the TAs do? It's less of this direct,
Yes.
just answering a question and more something else. And I think we have to figure that out. I don't know. Have you seen the same thing with your classes? Like the TAs are used less or
You know, what we've observed traditionally with our MBA students is there's a small group of students that uses the TAs, typically the less technical ones, and they use them a lot.
okay.
And we haven't seen a shift in that, although we are experimenting this summer and this fall with creating digital TAs, where we feed all the course content to a platform that a vendor is trialing with us and 3 or 4 other schools
Okay.
to create a digital TA. So we're going to see how that gets used and whether that changes the dynamics of what gets to the actual TAs.
Okay. Yeah, cool. All right. And these project classes, it's interesting because we don't know what the questions are going to be. And so it's like I feel like there's
Yes.
almost a different role that for a TA in a project class. Like what do they do that adds a lot of value to the students and is something they can do? Because I think the TAs also like, our TAs are PhD students here and like I'm sure yours are. And it's like I would like them to learn something too. Like, I wouldn't mind that, the TAs coming out with a pretty good experience under their belt. Like, all right, this was kind of interesting. I pushed myself in a new direction too.
Yeah, I can say just we don't have PhD students here, but when I was a PhD student, my dissertation topic came as a direct result of a student project for a class I was TAing.
That's perfect.
So I've got great,
Yeah,
great
yeah.
gratitude for that. So, Mike, I feel like there's now I kind of want you to straddle both your professor hat and your industry hat around kind of what do you feel like organizations are doing well with AI as and where do you feel like they're falling short, both in terms of your own observations, your engagement with Lyric, but also what you see with student projects.
Oh, well, that's a huge one, BJ. So
Huge question.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Like for sure, like the algorithm side seems to be getting a lot for companies that are sophisticated. You can now build these algorithms much faster. Like this is exactly what I want to do. Here's how I want to solve this particular supply chain problem, and bring that out. I think it feels to me that from what I'm seeing is there's been this huge shift in the bottleneck. The bottleneck used to be like just can I get a prototype of my idea out into the world, and these prototypes are like super easy now. Like I have this one class I teach, which not technical students basically, and I think 3 or 4 of the students have these side projects that would look like 3 years ago it looked like businesses, and it's like this part is not hard, and now the hard part is like, all right, how do you actually sell this idea? How do you sort of pick among the million different choices for the interface? Like product management has become much more important. Um, and then the other bottlenecks are like, how do I get the organization to change? And is this the right tool? And am I solving the right problem? Like it feels like the bottleneck has shifted there, which I think is kind of interesting for us in some ways. Like, how do we actually make sure we're solving the right problem? And then how do we actually get the solution fully out there, not just some prototype built?
Yeah, the thing I'd add is how do we teach students to identify problems? Because historically, we've defined the problems for them and taught them to solve them. And
Right.
even in the project context, in some sense, there's a problem statement that they walk into. I think that this skill of learning to identify what the real problem is behind that is going to be so important, and I haven't figured out how to teach it yet.
No, like, I've thought about this too. And it feels like these class project classes are the way to do that because any case that you or I could write up, just the fact that we write it up, like an LLM is going to figure out what the problem is based on that we wrote it. But if it's a real problem, you have different stakeholders, and every time you talk to someone or someone new pops up in the meeting, that you get a different version of what the problem is. And like I've kind of watched that
Yes,
over this quarter. Is like this is the value of the class. Is like, can the students actually figure out what they should solve? And it's not easy, and there's no right answer, and it's like it's hard to how can I replicate that in a normal classroom? It's hard to do, right? Because you can't. It's
yes.
artificial to do it, and this is not artificial. This is like a real way to do it. Like, what's the real problem here?
So I've got 2 last questions. First, I'd love to have you pitch a faculty colleague who doesn't have the same kind of industry experience that you do as to why teaching a class like this is rewarding for them?
Oh, so it's like it's so fun to see new problems, and it's if you're willing to challenge yourself, it's like I've learned about a whole bunch of fields that I didn't know about before, and you sort of it opens your eyes up to like what's out there in the world, and it's super challenging. If like you like a challenge, like because I don't know what problems the students are going to face. When students come to me, they're like, "Here's a problem." I'm like, that is a problem. Let's think through this together, and it's kind of it's fun. So I would encourage faculty to do it. I would also say, like, if you're a new faculty doing one of these kind of projects, what you need to be prepared for is there's a lot of work ahead of time to source the projects. Like, you should spend like probably as much time sourcing the projects as doing the running the class, and sort of as a kind of a watch out if you're new to this from a faculty point of view. It's hard. It takes time to
So I
sell.
think it's a really good insight is that it's a ton of fun. You get exposed to lots of new problems, but to know that there's an investment up front, I think that's
Right.
really important insight. Now I'm going to turn the question the other way, Mike. I'd love to have you give the pitch to potential industry partners. Why is this a good opportunity for them? Why is this something these kinds of opportunities things they should be excited about?
Oh, so okay. So I think this is it opens up a talent pipeline so they get get access to universities, and so just start to build that pipeline that they're doing that. It trains their employees to also how to manage these projects and run these projects. And it feels like this is going to be the direction of higher ed's going to go this way. And it's like companies want to be. I think companies should be want to be connected to universities, either their local ones or some national universities or whatever, so that they can just have access to that kind of talent, and also just to, sort of see where higher ed's going and sort of kind of participate in that process. And then, to boot is like if you can define your problem well and you meet with students once a week, I think you get nice deliverables out of this. Like you get you answer questions. Like I don't want to sell this as like a consulting project. I think that's sort of the wrong framing, but it's not far from that. It's sort of halfway between consulting, halfway between talent development. And if you treat it
Yeah.
right, you can get a lot of both of those halves.
Yeah, I think this is a great place to wrap up, Mike. It feels like this has been both a rich experience for you and a huge growth experience for your students. And I find great joy in teaching and developing students through the project-based model. And I think we're going to, as I said at the outset, I think we're going to be doing more and more of that in the future. So
It seems
industry
right.
partners that are online here, we need you. And I think you need us as well for some of the things Mike talked about.
I think so. It's a great partnership. It's a ton of fun. So thank you, VJ, for the questions.
And everybody that's listening, we will have Mike's contact and my contact in the show notes. If you've got project ideas, want to discuss them, please feel free to reach out to us. Mike teaches industrial engineering and operations research students. I teach MBA students who have a quantitative bent, and we look forward to hearing from you.
All right. Thanks, VJ.
See you next time.